question the Israelis did it. Is this a dangerous game? Absolutely. It's very dangerous. I think what the Americans have done subsequently, which is to say that they would support Israel no matter what if Iran attacks, is making a very bad situation even worse. I think what's going on here is that the Israelis are trying to drag us into a war with Iran. They, of course, have been trying to do that for a long time. Iran and Israel were not at war when the Israelis struck the embassy in Damascus. And it was, in my opinion, unprovoked. And it's something that violates basic international norms. You're just not supposed to do this. So they did it, and they put the Iranians in a position where they have to retaliate. And if they retaliate against Israel and then we come into the fight, what does that mean? It probably means that we're going to attack Iran. So here we have a war between the United States and Iran. That's the last thing that we need at this point in time. And then there's the whole question of escalation. How does this play itself out? If we whack Iran, what are the Iranians going to do to us? If the Israelis hit back at Iran, what will Iran do with regard to Israel? You can tell all sorts of stories about how this escalates in ways that are not good. And this, by the way, is why the United States has gone to great lengths up until now not to see us get into a war with Iran. It is not in the American national interest to get into a war with Iran. Iran doesn't want to get into a war with the United States or with Israel. But who is precipitating this? It's the Israelis, and we are foolishly taking the bait.
Do you cringe every time I do when you hear a member of Congress say aiding Israel is in the national security interest of the United States?
Yes, I do. The evidence is so overwhelming now that that's not true. The evidence is overwhelming that Israel is an albatross around our neck. And what's happening with regard to Iran, not to mention what's happening with regard to Hamas, is clear evidence, in my opinion, of what an albatross Israel is.
Has Israel failed to eradicate Hamas or even lost the benefit of its genocidal invasion of Gaza?
There's no question that they have not defeated Hamas. By the Israelis' account, there are probably about 40,000 fighters to begin with in Hamas, maybe even more. There's some Israelis who use a higher number, but let's say the number's 40,000. They claim they've killed 12,000 fighters. I doubt the number is that high, but let's assume that's correct. 12,000 out of 40,000 leaves a lot of fighters still alive. There's still a lot of tunnels. And very importantly, the Israelis have pulled almost all of their brigades, all of their fighting forces out of Gaza. There's only one brigade left in Gaza. So how does Israel defeat Hamas? And the answer is they don't. Hamas is in effect going to win this war. At some point, the shooting is going to stop. And when the shooting stops, Hamas is going to come out and celebrate and say, we survived, therefore we won. And if you read the Israeli press closely, which I do every day, there are all sorts of people in Israel who understand there is no way to defeat Hamas.
Is there, Ramadan is over. What happens if the IDF comes back and invades Rafah, where 1.25 million people are jammed in a city that once held just 250,000, and that million have been pushed southward by the Israeli military, supposedly to be safe?
Well, let's talk about the military dimension, defeating Hamas first, then talk about what can happen to the civilian population. The Israelis argue that to finish off Hamas, to defeat Hamas, to win a decisive victory, they have to invade Rafah. This is not a serious argument. They may kill more Hamas fighters if they invade Rafah, but the idea that they're going to knock out Hamas, and that's the end for Hamas, is just not a serious argument. Then there's the question of the civilian population.
Okay, just before you get to the civilian population, is this argument about the desirability of invading Rafah a political argument made by Prime Minister Netanyahu and his government?
Yes. The fact is that those forces on the right of Prime Minister Netanyahu in his government have made it clear that if he doesn't invade Rafah, they will overturn the government, right? So he is facing tremendous pressure from inside the government, inside the ruling coalition, to attack Rafah. So if he doesn't attack Rafah, he's in big political trouble. Furthermore, if he doesn't attack Rafah, right, he can never claim that he defeated Hamas, because he didn't attack Rafah, and he said Hamas is located there. There are 4 or 5 battalions there. Right? So he has to attack, I think, for political reasons. Otherwise, he's in big trouble.
All right, now I want you to address the geopolitical consequences of more mass slaughter of civilians down there.
Well, I think you have to put it into the broader context. The fact is that Samantha Power, who was in the government, has just said that famine has broken out in parts of Gaza. This is an amazing statement. Famine has now broken out. People are starving. The Israelis are not doing much, despite what the Biden administration says, to facilitate food supplies and water supplies moving into Gaza. And it looks like the genocide is continuing. And this is becoming apparent to more and more people people are saying something has to be done to put an end to this. This cannot continue. So if in that context, the Israelis go into Rafah and they kill huge numbers of innocent Palestinians, this is just going to make the public relations problem, for lack of a better phrase, even worse. This is going to put a greater stain on Israel's reputation. It's going to cause greater pressure to be brought to bear on the Biden administration, which of course is complicit in this genocide, and on the Israelis themselves to put an end to this. So this is not going to improve the situation either militarily or politically for the Israelis. Going into Rafah is going to make a horrible situation even worse.
Going back to what we were talking about a few minutes ago, Professor Mearsheimer, with the Israeli destruction of the Iranian consulate, would they have given warning to the U.S. before this happened? Wouldn't the U.S. say, for heaven's sakes, don't do that because we don't want to be dragged in? We're giving you all the help we can?
That's a great question, and I don't have a good answer. I would imagine that if they told us, we would have moved heaven and earth to tell them or convince them or coerce them not to attack the embassy. I would guess, and this is just a guess, they didn't tell us because they understood how we thought about that. You remember when we sent those aircraft carriers over in the beginning?
Right.
We did it not because we wanted to join into the war or join the war. We did it because we wanted to deter escalation. We have no interest in escalation. We're trying to actually de-escalate this conflict we now have with the Houthis. So we don't want another conflict with Iran or with Hezbollah. But the Israelis, I believe, they would like to drag us in.
Can you envision a full-fledged war between the United States and Iran, in which we have troops on the ground and naval personnel and ships and jet fighters and missiles and bombs over there?
Well, I don't think there'll be boots on the ground. I think if there's a war between us and Iran, it will involve naval ships, aircraft, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and so forth and so on. And I don't want to minimize what a disaster that would be, but I don't think we're going to invade Iran. That is a bridge too far.
Were you surprised at all at the revelation last week of the Israeli use of AI with these three programs? One with the crazy name of Lavender, the other, the offensive name to me, of Where's Your Daddy and Gospel. These programs, according to the Israeli journalist who exposed them, revealed the putting of numbers on an image of members of Hamas. 100 is must kill, 1 is the other end of that. And then putting facial recognition and numbers and whatever other information they had into the computer, and the computer deciding when and where to kill, but programmed to do so for maximum damage, so that a daddy was killed when his wife and children were there as well. Does this surprise you? Is this some legitimate excuse of Prime Minister Netanyahu that the computer did it?
No, this doesn't surprise me. And this is part of the genocidal campaign, along with the famine that the Israelis are behind. So this doesn't surprise me. The person who wrote this article is named Yuval Abraham, and it's in a magazine that all of your viewers should read. It's called Plus 972. This is the second major piece by Yuval Abraham on the air war, on the Israeli air war. And it is very important to understand that, first of all, he's an Israeli. And second, the two articles that he's written, including the one that you described, the other one was last November, that both of those pieces are based on extended conversations with people who are planning and conducting the war. So he has huge amounts of hard evidence. And in the first article that he wrote last November, he made it manifestly clear, or the article made it manifestly clear, that the Israelis were inflicting massive punishment on the civilian population on purpose. And this was not precision-guided weaponry at work. They were trying to kill large numbers of innocent Palestinians. And what you see with the more recent article that you just described is more of the same, except we get all of this detail about these programs like Lavender. And I would just note, building on what you said, that what I found most shocking was the story that Yuval Abraham tells about Lavender, which is that the Israelis, instead of killing someone who's in Hamas, when that fighter is by himself or with other Hamas fighters, waits till the person goes home and is with his family so that they can kill not only him, but kill the family. This is just horrible.
That, by definition, by the way, is a war crime, by definition.
Of course it is. But again, you want to remember, this is part of a genocidal campaign. This is part of a genocidal campaign. And if you don't like the word genocide, let's call it mass murder.
Right.
Israelis are involved in mass murder. And as you and I have talked about on numerous occasions, we are complicitous in this.
How does this end? Does it end with Netanyahu coming to his senses and then Ben-Gvir and Smotrich leaving the government and a new election and he's voted out of office? Does it end with more slaughter? Does it end with Joe Biden saying enough is enough, we're not sending you spare parts or 2,000-pound bombs anymore?
Well, you always want to remember that when you ask how something ends, it's important to talk about the military dimension, but it's more important to talk about the political dimension, because as Clausewitz said, war is an extension of politics by other means. And the key question here is, what does the political settlement look like? You know, when the shooting stops, at some point the shooting is going to stop. It's already diminished somewhat. That could change when if they go into Rafah. But there's less shooting today, less killing today than there was 2 months ago or 4 months ago. And it's going to end at some point. But the $64,000 question is, what does the political settlement look like? And the answer is, there is no plan as to what to do with Gaza after the shooting stops. If you read the Israeli press, all sorts of military officers, these are military officers in the IDF, are complaining that Netanyahu will not tell them what the political plan looks like. because they believe they can't continue to wage the war, bring the war to an end, without some understanding of what the political architecture of Gaza is going to look like. So what's going to happen here is the shooting is going to stop at some point. You're going to have 2+ million people, most of whom are homeless, most of whom are starving, and most of whom have no political system that they can turn to for help. And the question is, what are we going to do then?
You know, not far from where I live in New Jersey, there were Israeli real estate agents here purporting to sell or offer for sale land in Gaza. And the Attorney General of New Jersey, who is himself Jewish, said, you can't do it. And they went up to Canada where they're offering it for sale. Yeah. So I don't know if that's part of Netanyahu's goal, which is to make this some sort of a commercial enterprise. This would be theft on top of murder. The theft is insignificant compared to the mass murder, but maybe that's part of his goal.
No, but let's just build on this. The principal Israeli goal, in my opinion, from the very beginning, has been to ethnically cleanse Gaza.
To expand Greater Israel from the river to the sea.
Well, they've already expanded Greater Israel in the sense that they now control Gaza, right? They control Gaza, and they control the West Bank. And of course, they controlled Green Line Israel, which is the pre-1967 Israel. So they controlled all of Greater Israel. The problem that the Israelis face is that there are as many Palestinians in Greater Israel as there are Israeli Jews. And what they want to do is they want to cleanse the Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza. And they saw October 7th as an opportunity to cleanse. And they tried to cleanse, and they failed. But when people start talking about selling, real estate on the Mediterranean in Gaza, they are assuming that the Palestinians are going to be driven out. And then you can bring in Israeli settlers, and you can sell waterfront property to American Jews or to Canadian Jews, right? That's what they're assuming here. But the problem is they have been unable to ethnically cleanse. They have been completely unsuccessful. And the Israelis do not have a vested interest in creating a viable political and social order in Gaza, because that will make it harder to cleanse.
Right.
It's much better to maintain something approximating the status quo for the foreseeable future, because that lends itself to a policy of ethnic cleansing. All of this is to say the future for these Palestinians in Gaza